Good morning and welcome to Pro Frequency, a program produced by Creative Community League that discusses issues of importance to women and their friends. I am Anne Babson, an award-winning poet and president of the Women's National Book Association of New Orleans. I am here to help you celebrate National Poetry Month. Today, I am speaking to Nicole M.K. Eiden, a poet and award-winning filmmaker whose work captures the simple challenges and beauty of ordinary life, most particularly the ordinary life that many women live. Nicole has lived and worked here in New Orleans for over 20 years. You may know her from her political engagement in human rights issues. I have seen her at demonstrations for a variety of progressive causes. You may know her from her marvelous pie shop, Windowsill Pies, of which she is the co-founder and co-owner. And you ought to get to know her as a poet. Her collection, I Am One of You, discusses, as New Orleans author Constance Adler observes, the fertile tension in being child, friend, mother, lover, adventurer, and creator. She has work forthcoming in a number of journals, including Podunk Review, a literary journal based in New Orleans. So welcome, welcome, welcome. It is a wonderful thing to see you on Pro Frequency, Nicole. And how are you? You have had a long day of work doing a million things.
Well, it's still the morning, Anne, so.
Well, I'm saying good morning to listeners, but the miracle of radio allows you to be talking to me after a long day of work.
No, it's been a day full of things, as we all have every day, but I'm so excited to be here and talk about the thing I like to talk about the most, poems.
Well, you're a wonderful poet. The thing that strikes me about your collection that you wrote a little while ago called I Am One of You, in which I see you have a picture of your grandmother, who is an athlete, a student athlete at the time, is that it is profoundly intimate. You are writing lyrics that are talking about the ordinary moments in a person's life in a manner that elevates them and makes us understand, a little bit like Thornton Wilder talked about in Our Town, a world, how beautiful you are if we could only see you, I paraphrase. And your collection is redolent with some of those things. Furthermore, what I see that particularly interests me, and I was hoping you could talk about it, is in your dedication, you talk about how the women in your life have taught you to create a consequential life. What does it mean to you to have a consequential life, Nicole?
Well, you're right. My mother's side was mostly women. She had 4 sisters, and she had 3 sisters, 4 of them. And that was the predominant family that I saw. And I grew up seeing people do deliberate acts. And I guess that's what I think of as a consequential life, a moment by moment life that's also deliberate. I was just thinking of not a close friend, but a person in my world. Husband was just diagnosed with a really rare form of cancer in his foot. And my dad was sick when I was a kid. And it just hit me so hard of like what I could do. And she made it easy for me by giving me a clear task. And all of a sudden I was just like, well, yes, I have times. We don't always have time for everything, but it's just so nice sometimes when something cuts through the fat of your day and you can spread out and you're like, this is what I'm going to do and it'll make a difference. That's an example of just like making a consequential life. I mean, something my dad passed down from my grandmother, who like really had not a lot in this world, but always made time and was always the first to lend a hand. I'm not always the first to lend a hand. My hands are full. And I always think back to that. It's like, gosh, like to be the first to lend a hand, not in a way that's a martyr, not in a way that's a mirror back to look at yourself, but just as like, who needs the most at the second, you know, it doesn't have to always be giving in that way, but that's just like, I guess, on my mind the second, because of like some things that have been going on. A friend just had a baby a couple days ago, and like, it just felt good to drop some windowsill pies off on her porch. It's like, and those things add up. They've added up for me, as a recipient of love and care over my life. And that's given me a little bit of bandwidth, I think, to be that person sometimes for other people. And one thing I hate is when I can't be that person. When
I think that
can't
it's
do
too
that.
rare that people feel as you do about a desire to be of service to their community, as well as the people individually that they love. And if your hands are full and you're not the first to run into the burning building to rescue people, I have to believe it's because I often see you um, right holding a sign at a rally for a larger, your hands are full of signs to do things to help people who are in some kind of political danger. And I admire that a great deal. I have a question for you about your poetry. Your poetry is so deeply personal, and a lyric poem is a poem that is in the first person and has an individual feeling to it, rather than a global declarative feeling like a political speech. But I want to know, do you consider your work political?
I mean, it's so easy to say the personal is political, but I mean, it's true. I mean, one thing I just think is wherever we're speaking from comes from our own set of opportunities and experiences and boundaries and limitations and viewpoints and all that. So, and that's the beauty of what's going on now. We're just finally, I think, as a culture, and I'll speak from as a white culture, like opening the door to ask is a better place, and to ask for other people to share their opinion. And one of my most, I'm always challenged to step back and listen. And I appreciate when other people do that for me too.
It is wonderful to both be someone who has something to say and to be a good listener. And in that spirit, I have asked you, because of Pro Frequency's interest in the lives of women and their friends, if you would be willing to read to us 4 poems that honor women. And I would ask you to read them one at a time for us, and we'll talk about each one as you do. Which one would you like to read for us first?
I guess I'll read a couple that show different phases of life. I think I'm going to read this one about my dad's mother, my grandmother, first. This is a newer poem, and my grandmother was challenging. I would drive to visit her in northern Ohio, and I lived in the middle of the state. And it took me a long time to really see her. And it was kind of like when I finally saw her wedding, I finally realized it was her wedding portrait, because she had just a suit on. She didn't have a wedding dress, didn't have enough money for that. And she was beautiful. And I had not seen that person. And I wrote this after she died. And it's inspired by, well, you'll hear reference to Langston Hughes' poem. It's called No Crystal Stair, 1991. Just because it's not in style doesn't mean it's not good material, said Grandma about the double knit polyester she'd been actively storing in stacks since the oil crisis. After I didn't bite, she added, it would make a good suit. I was 15, and this was the 4th time she had brought it up. I shrank from those flat, gray Christmas drives north to her small Lake Erie town. We'd sit in the heavily curtained, carpeted living room, hear about the double knit, hear her wonder who could afford to pass up good material and ground beef on sale. She'd give a tour of her narrow freezer stuffed with plated frozen dinners she'd made to get through January. 14 meatloaf, 12 chicken a la king, 3 loaves of date bread. She had made 4, but had given 1 to Mary Louise. And then it was time for lunch at Brown Derby. Dad made it clear she was proud to have enough to take us out after a lifetime of the same thin winter coat. Grilled steak medallions or seared jumbo shrimp, definitely a baked potato, and always leftovers, rationed for her next day's lunch. I never had a meal in her home. No matter what year, she always looked the same, worn out with mucus in her eye, white elastic waistband pants, double knit, of course. They were Blair brand from the Sunday circulars. You clipped an order form, mailed it in. They were popular with Grandma because they were 2 for 1, didn't fade, and air dried in the tub with great results. She had a couple of colors, but those white ones were the favorite because they matched just about everything. When a small check came in after Grandpa died, she had money to spend on herself for the first time. Instead, she bought me a video camera. I was startled she'd noticed I wanted to make movies. I had never paid serious attention when she referred to her pottery wheel buried in the shed, or how she had wanted to go to college. A few years into my own burrow through college, Grandma placed a faded Bakelite bracelet in my hand. She stated, "The woman who gave me this was one of the only kind adults I knew as a girl," and promptly changed the subject to how she was organizing another St. Joseph's first grade class reunion picnic. She would provide stuffed tomatoes, deviled eggs, chocolate oatmeal cookies. Hopefully Mary Louise would make one of her marinated salads. Quite a few still lived in the area, and most had RSVP'd. At the age of 85, Grandma still missed school. In the hours before she died, she asked my dad to get her purse. "Son," she must have said, "open the magnetic clasp. Go into the zipped side pocket, reach past loose coins, and back up Kleenex. There is a poem I cut from the newspaper and carried every day." Dad found the poem, rumpled, yellowed. It was about climbing and hardship and not going back, an ultimate message from mother to son, a message for a son to pass on. And so I sit now with this invitation from Langston Hughes. Wish when she had hinted at what she longed for, I would have moved closer, said, start at the beginning, asked how she made the food she needed to survive.
What a beautiful poem. It has the casual cadence of somebody just talking, and yet it is so clearly structured to lead us to this magnificent coda at the end, kind of like a film that seems almost like a documentary made with a video camera instead of what Hollywood does on a soundstage. Did you ever figure out what was her particular fascination with polyester double knit and putting a 15-year-old in a suit?
I know. She just didn't understand style or anything that wasn't just practical and, quality of, that's just, she was raised in the Depression, as so many of our elders were. And, there's just no room for style. Obviously not everyone from that era would agree, but she really embodied that experience.
I noticed that your poems that are deceptively sort of conversational and sort of simple in their elocution, you're not trying to sound like T.S. Eliot. They are forever trying to find the secret life of their subjects. It's a challenging thing for anyone to do, and the detail of the secret crumpled poem underneath the tissues, and the fact that a woman who is 85 still feels sentimental about school, quite possibly the only time in her life where she wasn't, uh, beholden to a variety of obligations to other people during the school day. It really makes me feel like I have seen her. And I do believe you have honored your grandmother, who probably was kind of horrifying when you were 15 and you imagined yourself in the double knit polyester. I would have screamed at 15 about that. Um, would you mind reading your next poem?
Absolutely, thanks. This one's also a newer one. I'm 45 now, I think. I always forget. But this one's called Age 44. When I turn up beneath laundry, fastened tight to impatience, I order myself down to the ring of stones to tend fire. My inefficient way burns more kindling, and I'm not proud. But each log needing gathered forces me out to find a new word to bring home, initiating the only useful pattern I know for living. Speak uncovered word, feed wood to flames, save the straightest pieces for construction, build up embers, cook the meal. Then evening blazes to ash. How quickly I resort to common utterings. God, how many days remain? And I want more. There is no time to waste, yet pattern affirms there is time enough. Each new day granted makes plain the two things I am building, home and fire, two ways to say human, to say source.
It's a very a very beautiful poem in that it again, if I asked you for a poem that honors women, what is the most ancient thing that women have ever done, other than simply give birth? Certainly, women are among those who would have tended a fire and cooked a meal. And it has been a traditional feminine art. Men used to dismiss poems and by women, and perhaps they still do, because they weren't about quote unquote serious subjects like warfare or political coups, or and yet none of those highfalutin men would have made it out of diapers if they hadn't been fed by a parent who was quite probably their mother.
I think of that all the time, that exact image, especially when I think about politicians.
Yes, I have unfortunately watched too many senatorial committee hearings where I wanted to scream something like that at the man with the microphone on the television. And I can only imagine having seen you on the same streets holding somewhat similar signs to the ones that I might have been holding, that this is a shared sentiment we have. But it also strikes me that you have talked about the practical steps of a task. Would you mind telling us the connection in your life between poetry and pies? Is there a connection between your cooking, which you do a lot of at Windowsill Pies, and the poetry that you write?
And I'm looking for up here at my desk because I have like a poem stuck up here and I'm trying to find it, but it's about making the pie. But yeah, I mean, I literally was just trying to figure out a way to move forward in my life, and that's how the pies were born. And it was Judy Walker, who was the food writer at the newspaper, the Times-Picayune at the time, and she I'm gonna sneeze. And when she interviewed us a while back, the headline was, gosh, the title of the article was the imperfection, the perfection of imperfect. I'm messing it up, but how basically the imperfect, but how pies don't have to be perfect. There's this beauty in the imperfection. And I wish I could remember exactly what Judy wrote, because it really hit the nail on the head, but it summed up why I chose pie and not cake. I mean, it was just having that structure, but also having that room to play and like a different level of expectation. And our pies are obviously very beautiful. But there's a little room in there for how they turn out in the oven. And but just building something that wasn't there before. I mean, I think that's really the elemental shared trait between creative endeavors, is just there wasn't this and now there is, and it takes coming to the table every day to make it happen.
Yes, I understand that. One of the things that I have been doing lately myself, I, for no particularly good reason, have an intermediate certificate from a French cooking school in Paris, which would not make me qualified to open a restaurant like yours. But if you were at my house and you wanted a pie, I could surely make you a pie. But I have started a food newsletter, Substack newsletter, because I've been thinking about our divided country. And I thought, well, what is left for us to talk about as a community as a whole? And the thing it occurred to me, we were not going to like throw bombs at each other over were things like pies and blueberry muffins. And we are not disagreeing about flavors and food. And I'm hoping to build a bridge, as silly as that sounds.
No, yeah.
And I believe that there is nothing more traditionally peacemaking than breaking bread with someone, or allow me to suggest slicing pies with someone.
No, it's true. I mean, it is a really good way to, you know, come together. I mean, my dad always said when people talk, they divide themselves. When they work together, they come together. And it's in the same vein, you know.
I agree. I agree. And I love that you have elevated in the poem that you read to us the simple tasks that are as ancient as human community itself, and given the hands that make them a kind of dignity, which is maybe a little bit like what your father said about people working together and understanding each other. Would you read us your next poem, please?
Yes, as a little side, I couldn't find Grace Paley's poem, but she has the poem called The Poet's Occasional Alternative, and I'll just read the opening line. I was going to write a poem. I made a pie instead. It took about the same amount of time, and of course the pie was final draft of a poem that would have had some distance to go in weeks and much crumpled paper. I won't read the rest, but everyone liked the pie.
I knew
Funny.
Grace Paley when I was a student at Sarah Lawrence College, and she was
Seriously? Wow.
hilarious. Yeah, she was a really funny and delightful woman. And
Wow.
and she was eminently practical in her approach to her writing.
That's
So,
yes, I have the next poem. I just somehow don't know what happened. Oh, here it is. My book has got hidden amongst my papers. This is a poem called Mortgage.
from your collection, I Am One
Yeah.
of You.
Mhm. Yes. I wrote this before I was a parent. Mortgage. The house that we built is lovely. Here I sleep next to you every night. Remember when we were unfamiliar? I had a plump life. You had a plump life. We were busy with our things. We tried to be loved by other people. Remember that messy life? But then, as they say, we got together. We had sex every day. Who knew when I would ask the wrong question, the instant you would turn dull? But you weren't scared of scrambled eggs. You were keen to walk the dog. And now here we are every night. It's after midnight, sapped from balancing plates and people all night for cash, exhausted from nailing floorboards and keeping hair off the tub. My calves ache and I don't want to give. It's the end of the month. Is there enough for the mortgage? I want to buy a hardback atlas, the book that split the Germanys, took me to the USSR, pressed my kindergarten watercolors, proved my humble town existed. The atlas is $80, but we need toothpaste. I want to see a movie. Can't, there's not enough. It's the end of the month. I move away from you. Find your own dinner. Do you want something or are you just hugging me goodnight? The first comes. We pay the mortgage another month. You reach out again. Your hand says, come here. All weighty words fall second to the comfort we create. I don't wonder what you want. I quickly kiss you hard.
There are so few pieces of writing that explore marriage with that kind of honesty. Jane Austen left us at the altar over and over again. And while I'm thinking that the gentleman class of the 18th century didn't have mortgages exactly on their homes, nevertheless, there is a kind of reality in the marriage that you describe. Tell us, is this a revolt against romantic poetry in its strictest sense?
I never thought about it. I love that. I mean, honestly, I was young when I wrote that. I mean, younger than I am now, but it still so holds true to me. It still feels so relevant to my life, you know, and just that commitment and that ebb and flow and that just showing up for each other. And I just love that poem. For me, it's always living. And I feel different than I did when I wrote that. I mean, that was so long ago. Literally right now, I hear my husband downstairs making a clamor doing dishes. So I'm going to shut the door. No, but I don't feel like those same exact feelings, but I still feel that poem, and like the way that we have to balance all the things that we're balancing and choose each other. And you know, and in the contract of a mortgage is just in the contract of a marriage, just like the web of that.
Yes. Hollywood tells us less about the leaky faucet that needs fixing than it does about, you know, the first time you see each other on some enchanted evening.
Right. Across a crowded room.
Yes. And you have, and yet it is a place that feels warm and real when you write it. There are people who've written about the bitterness of breakups, but this isn't about a breakup. This is about people slogging through the difficulties of an actual, real, I smell his sweaty armpit kind of a marital situation. He probably hates the habit I have doing something. And yet here we are for the duration. And it's beautiful, even though it's sometimes difficult. And again, I don't hear enough of the honesty about that. We are so, as poets, used to the idea of spoon, June, and moon. We want so much to believe in romantic things that elevate beyond the mortgage, but you embrace the fire, the mortgage, the concrete objects in our lives, the daily activities that are not glorified. It's not the moment where the trophy is handed out. And yet you give us this picture that has all of the emotions in the lyric poems of a poet who's rapturous in love. It's really very, it's sly of you, frankly. But I honestly wish that I had read more poems that told me the story that poem tells about marriage before I was old enough to date. I think I would have been saner for a lot of the time I was dating. And I do think it honors women and men, because here they are slogging it out,
Absolutely.
somehow finding each other despite the things that are difficult.
Sure.
I think you have another poem to read for us.
Yeah, I will. One other. This is my most recent poem in a lot of ways. And it was written during the pandemic.
I'm sorry, it was written during the pandemic. The sound was
Yes, written during the pandemic. A recent poem. Embodiment. To be a girl's braid, pre-wind, wound tight for the day, tied down and ribboned, proclaims a readiness to get to work, a desire to master naming. Covering the lagoon, green-headed birds float with their brown companions. I don't say Anas Platarinkos because I don't know the Latin, but when I encounter their beauty, I still label mallard. To identify accurately has established merit. Thank God for doctors. Yes, learn to name, but do not stay. To encounter what is beyond a diagnosis, chronic myelogenous leukemia, is to walk the gravel next to who is in pain. Last week, 2 women with 5th graders enter hospice. 4 days ago, Pavel was murdered on the bit of grass between his new house and the street. Tonight, on my drive home from the bakery, my mother calls to say the cousin who long ago showed me how to climb a sand pile has had a heart attack, has died. He is 2 years younger than I am. His twinkling wife and 6 kids must face his woodworking tools, his unfinished projects. Funerals of both mothers stream online. A friend texts to name each familiar song as it comes, texts a play-by-play of tender eulogy jokes, putting me there as I roll out pie, help customers, make change. Back to work from Pavel's funeral, my business partner grasps for words to explain the walk from the church to the street with Pavel's friends, his husband. She says, tying her apron, "Now I understand the jazz funeral in my body." Everything we know to name comes in first through the senses. And what are we here for if not to walk the gravel path next to hurt, next to who is excluded? If your belly is full, give the best. Become a keyless gate. If your belly is full or empty, untether from your own classifications. Not for me, smarter than, addicted. Unloosen what has braided you. Leave behind even the keyless gate. Dance through the open field as unencumbered bird, then as air, ongoing.
That's beautiful and important. We have only begun to mourn the about 1 million Americans who died during the pandemic so far. My husband lost his best friend from childhood. I lost one of my best friends, first to disinformation and conspiracy theories, then to COVID-19. I don't know anyone whose life hasn't been touched somehow by the loss of someone. And we are still sort of scrambling to our feet. I don't know how we'll count the dead in terms of their impact on our lives, the absence of people we were fond of. You give us a tiny key to the beginning and a few instructions, almost like a recipe for how to move forward to at least the next place, the next station at the Stations of the Cross here. With that, if it's all right with you, I'd like to ask you to read one more poem for us, perhaps in a not entirely dissimilar spirit, in your collection, which again, I'm going to name for the radio, I Am One of You. Um, uh, it's called Prayer. Um, would you read us the poem Prayer, please?
Honored. Thanks for asking. Prayer. You've heard that even playing baseball is prayer. Opening a jar for a child or a child opening door for you is gift. Two people who love each other, maybe unevenly, maybe not enough. Can we ever articulate where we fit together, how far we will go in? I can only go on answering yes. Some have done it before us. The street outside never hears us walking, only me passing with dog. The greenhouse finally asks your name. Can I really say love or I love you or I think somewhere down you love me? There are no shortcuts. I remain open-handed.
What a beautiful poem. Um, the Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay Colony said with some frequency that to work is to pray. And so many poems that you write are about human activities of work. I'm wondering, do you agree with the Puritans, at least in that one measure? And to whom are you praying, if I might ask?
No, I grew up in with a map that was very like just this progressive. I grew up in a progressive Catholic family. And I grew up calling God she and he. So I have tried to instruct that to my daughter that we use those words because we're comfortable with those pronouns, but I think that's just our own way of making something that we can kind of connect to, but I think that's even so simplistic. Yesterday I was in the car with my daughter and an ambulance passed, and I instructed her, when an ambulance passes, I always make the sign of the cross and think about the people in the ambulance and the people they're going to. And I try to take a deliberate approach to my instruction, like not just have her watch me, but like say stuff, like, because that's just the way I do things. And I I saw some kids today that worried me. They were my daughter's age today, and they were on a bike. They were 10, and I just thought to myself, like, I'm gonna try to keep those kids in my mind, as they grow, because they're struggling already. I'm always thinking about the bigger picture. When I don't, I feel small myself. It's the only thing that keeps me not nervous and scared about short-term stressors, which I think limits all of us. And I often think about, like, we only have so much ability. So like when we are worried about our security or our day-to-day, we can't, it's just impossible to focus on a bigger picture. And but when I can make that step and like just take it off my shoulders, I just am better. So I do often try to do that. I don't always succeed, but yeah, I do think there's so many ways to just I'm not very limited with how I see the world that we can't see. I have my own like patterns from like my background, and I think it's really good to sometimes like embrace the patterns and the like way you were given, and then kind of challenge that, but move forward from that. But there's so many people in every tradition who are pushing the envelope, And that's what I love. I love that. I love learning from other traditions, and I love seeing how it all integrates. Sometimes it's easier to use the language that you were raised with or whatever, but and just push it. I love pushing it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's all integrated. I'm not interested in, I like when people can name things, like just like my poem, but I like when people can transcend those names too.
Well, it was a progressive Catholic, St. Francis of Assisi, who said, do everything.
Oh, my
To,
cat was under the house. Sorry, Anne. My cat was under the house last night, annoying the crap out of me. And I was like, St. Francis, get this cat out of this house, Help me out here. So continue with your quote. I'm sorry. Say
it's
that
all
again.
right. St. Francis was the patron saint of animals, but St. Francis of Assisi said the following about uh, the way he imagined evangelism, and he was a progressive Catholic by really any measure. Um, he said, do everything to bring people to Christ, only if absolutely necessary, use words. So, Nicole, I'd like to close this interview by, first of all, thanking you for truly doing everything and writing about people who do everything and honoring them with your words more than only if necessary.
I love that quote. I didn't know that quote, but I really feel it. So thank you for sharing that. I love it.
It has been a pleasure to interview you, and I can hardly wait till your next collection.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to say that I love your pies too, because they are just awesome. So thank you for sharing your work in so many ways with this community, including with Pro Frequency today. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Anne. Thank you for including me and inviting me and pulling all those things out of me. So thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.